Wow, it was really annoying getting this PC to work in this game. I had secure boot enabled, which this game does require for the anti-cheat to work and to let you play the game, but for some reason it wasn't letting me in the game. Finally, I just reset all my BIOS settings, still didn't work. Then I went ahead and actually just turned secure boot on and off again, and there it is, now we're in the game. Then MSI Afterburner wouldn't show me my stats that you're seeing up in the top left corner. I saw a lot of comments talking about that too. So on this PC, I ended up downloading the latest beta version of it, and that update seems to have got everything up and running. So now we can monitor the performance. Now in this video, I want us to focus primarily on CPU limited performance because I put in an RTX 3080. This is the 12 gigabyte version of the card. Which I'm imagining we'll be able to get to hit CPU limits on the Ryzen 5 5600X that I put into the system. I'm also not at all paying attention to gameplay, so whatever, it is what it is. Focusing a little more on some more realistic gameplay in a second. But yeah, so we are looking at the Ryzen 5 5600X and RTX 3080. This is a realistic, time period-wise build people may have put together. Save a little bit of money on the CPU by going with the, Ryzen 5 5600 class to get that RTX 3080 into the build. And we'll start out here for our testing. Now, it's looking like at ultra settings, we're able to get around 80 FPS at 1440p. And we are primarily CPU limited. You can see that our GPU usage percentage is around 70%. You can also note that if you look at the top right corner of the screen in the little green text, that is the in-game performance overlay, which can tell us the CPU frames per second and CPU milliseconds of frame time versus the GPU. Notice that the GPU, it's saying is taking about 10 milliseconds to calculate a frame, which means it could be running at around 100 frames per second, whereas the CPU is taking around 15 milliseconds to calculate a frame, which means we are CPU limited. And as I jumped into combat there, you even saw that it dipped to around 50 in the 1% lows, actually around 40 in the 1% lows. All right, I'm gonna try to now stop talking and staring at counters, get us a little bit more gameplay before we maybe change graphic settings, etc. Now, one thing to note is that I am actually at the ultra graphic settings. Now, that is important because I have noticed already when testing on my 5090 and 9800X3D that the ultra settings are increasing the burden on the CPU, not just the GPU, which isn't always the case in every game. So that is important to look at here. We notice that we are at 100% resolution, native TAA. And again, we are at 1440p native resolution here. So ultra settings, native 1440p on the Ryzen 5 5600X and RTX 3080 12 gigabyte. Let me actually try to play the game here for a little bit. Now, in testing a game like this, live, there's really some choices you have to make. I'm gonna go for more like realistic gameplay testing as opposed to side-by-side testing. That means if I test other hardware, that's a teammate, what am I doing? If I test out other hardware, we're not gonna be able to get apples-to-apples comparisons. That's just the nature of this kind of live gameplay testing. The alternative is to try to just like run into the middle of nowhere and try to generate some more apples-to-apples scenarios. The problem is then you're not necessarily seeing what happens in actual combat. So there's pros and cons to both. So what we're gonna do here is less useful for side-by-side, this hardware versus that hardware, what percent faster is it? But I think is more useful for, hey, I have this hardware or something like it. What type of performance can I maybe expect? Anyway, it's looking like averages can be around 80 FPS here, but the 1% lows are certainly below 60. Again, let me try to get into some more combat with people around the screen. Also, I noticed on just like a map-to-map variance, there can be differences in the CPU burden map-to-map. And interestingly, even sometimes these more city-focused maps, I think can actually be sometimes more CPU burden, which I was a little surprised at, but I think perhaps it's getting so many players in close proximity to one another. That is the cause of that. Also, maybe differences in the amount of like destructibility in the environment in close proximity. I was just shooting at a teammate, wasn't I? There must have been somebody behind me. Anyway, whatever. I'm dumb. Revive me, dude! I don't care if you get shot. Revive, revive, revive. Now, why are you reviving your friend there? Okay, while we're doing that, I can mention that we're not going to be able to really improve the performance by just turning down to lower like DLSS settings. So some people might be like, oh, I want more performance, I should use DLSS. So it's important to understand that when you're CPU limited, which I think we are here, despite being at native 1440p, that turning down the internal rendering resolution, which is what DLSS does, we can go to performance mode here to kind of show that off, does not really help the situation when you're CPU bound. Because notice, if we look at, again, at the top right corner of the screen, the little green text, you can pinch to zoom if you're on mobile. I know it's hard to see. I couldn't find anywhere obvious to change the text size in that in the performance overlay built into the game. But notice that our GPU now is, computing frames even quicker, like 6 or 7 milliseconds. The GPU is capable of 140 frames per second-ish, but the CPU is still around 70 frames per second. And how rude that that guy was waiting to kill me while I'm staring at my frame rate counter. Oh well. So anyway, well, we'll do some testing here, but again, at ultra settings, it's looking like this is pretty much where our limit's at. Let's do a little bit of running around in a tank. So it looks like running around in the tank with a lot going on here, things are even more demanding. We're only getting 58-ish frames per second. There's a lot of players on screen right now. That's difficult on the CPU. But again, the GPU is capable of so much more. So if you have a 3080 and you're like, oh man, maybe I should upgrade it to get better performance in this game, think about what kind of CPU you're on, because it looks like that is the limit here. Notice I'm also showing in the top left corner all of the CPU cores. And they're pretty much all just absolutely maxed out. So this game is not unoptimized on the CPU in the sense that like it's not utilizing the CPU resources that are available. This is a 6-core, 12-thread CPU, and we are certainly using all of those 6 cores and 12 threads that we have. It's just, there's just a lot of burden on it. Okay, yeah, it's looking like as we're getting a lot going on the map here, we're getting a lot of players in this area. Yeah, it's looking like the 5600X is sort of topping out around 60 frames per second here at the ultra settings. Now, I'm going to try changing to the low graphics settings, but it's important to note that not all of the settings can be changed in-game. Most of them will. I'm going to put this down to performance mode, switch this down to the low preset, and just to be clear, not everything is going to actually change in-game without a full game reset. That being said, enough changes that it does still impact the performance, including on the CPU. Notice that in this exact same environment, all these players in this area, same game and all of that, performance is now up closer to an mid-70s to 80 FPS going to these low settings. Notice I'm still on DLSS Performance mode to reduce the burden on the GPU as much as possible to force the CPU limit to the performance. So yeah, it's looking like we can get to closer to 80 FPS in this situation on the CPU. So it's certainly looking like if you are on a, I was gonna say, older or lower end CPU, but really almost any CPU this game can be pretty demanding on. If you're shooting for higher frame rates, it really is looking like it's very worthwhile to turn down to the lower graphics settings. Like I said, I would have to actually fully restart the game to fully get to the low settings, but most of them do apply mid-game, and we did see a significant performance boost by doing so. For a second, I thought that was a teammate. No, it was not. What is going on here? We got a lot going on. I'm the last squad member alive, guys. Or so it says. Where even the enemy is located, I don't know. There's a lot of destruction going on here. So this seems to be a good place to be loading up the CPU burden anyway. But even the 1% lows are close to 60 FPS here. I know oftentimes in a competitive game you would be wanting more than that. But you know, averages are around 80. So yeah, you know, it'd be nice to be getting hundreds of frames per second on the CPU, but it is getting a little older now. It is still 6-core in a game that is absolutely crazy. I don't know what's going on. Are the graphics supposed to look like that? Is that an effect that's going on? I don't know. That it looks a little weird, but let's go ahead and spawn back in. Wow. Again, is that supposed to, is that just fire? Is that what's going on? I don't know, guys. Maybe it's needing the game to restart for that to look correct, or maybe it is supposed to look like that. I don't know. Looks strange. Okay. Let's go ahead and push in a bit. All right. Yeah, this can't pot. Is that really what this is supposed to look like? Maybe it's supposed to be like I'm just blinded by the light? I don't know, guys. Isn't that a song? Probably shouldn't sing it or we'll get demonetized or something. Okay, all right, let's capture the point. Or let's not capture the point. I don't know, since we're so CPU bound here, I'm not sure what is particularly useful. I mean, we could try going up to medium settings maybe, and see how that does on the CPU side of things, because again, it does seem like graphic settings are having an impact on the CPU situation. Again, I'm still using DLSS Performance mode to relieve the burden on the GPU as much as possible to force CPU limits in this testing. But again, doing it on a GPU that at least makes sense that people may have paired with this CPU rather than putting in like a 5090 or something like that. Okay, it's looking like medium settings. We are getting looks like 80-ish FPS, 60-ish FPS on the 1% lows, but let's get more extended testing, maybe in some different environments. Again, I really want to get into a big combat area with a lot going on. Oh, I'm on the turret now, guys. Where are the enemies? Okay. There seem to be some enemies down here. Oh, I can zoom in. I'm not usually in vehicles. I prefer infantry combat, but we're trying stuff. It's good to get different types of gameplay into our testing here. Is that an enemy there? It's so hard to see. Okay, there's definitely guys here. All right. Is that, no, that's teammate. Anybody through the bus? Okay, looks like performance-wise, we're kind of mid-70s FPS range, but look at the 1% lows. They're at like 37. I'm gonna reset it though. Maybe that's kind of old data from respawning in or something. So resetting the frame rate averages now so we can kind of see where the 1% lows goes. Yeah, still definitely under 60 FPS on the 1% lows. The last squad member alive. Okay, where are we at? Are we gonna go anywhere? Gonna do anything? Okay, I might abandon the vehicle. I want to go do something else. I've got to admit, I understand that, you know, a big part of Battlefield is the vehicle combat, but for me, I just have more fun with infantry combat. This seems... I mean, I guess it's nice to just kind of mow them down when you have a vehicle and they don't, but I don't know. I prefer to run around. Whatever. I'm getting performance metrics. All right, where are they at? Where are they at, guys? I'm actually having fun, though. This is anyway. What do you guys think about the game so far? You can let me know in the comment section. I wasn't super into Battlefield 2042, so been a while since I played much Battlefield, but I could see myself playing this one a bit. I'm so far enjoying it more. Anyway. Yeah, it looks like we're around 80 FPS, 60 FPS, 1% lows, riding around in the vehicle, but I'm just kind of in a back alley here. I mean, there certainly are enemies. I'm getting shot. A lot of smoke. Where are they at? Lay down some blind fire. Covering fire. I don't know. Kind of rather be somewhere else right now. This doesn't feel particularly useful. Okay, I'm getting out. Find a new gunner. Okay. Teammate down here. Can I revive him, or is it bait? It was bait. I'm dead. Okay, let's go ahead and test out. So let's go graphics settings. Let's go to the high preset. Again, not everything is going to apply while in game without the reset, but a lot of the settings do. And let's spawn in on some action. Can I spawn in here? Okay. So it's now high settings, but still DLSS Performance, again, to try to force more of a CPU burden rather than a GPU burden. Looking like mid-70s-ish. That's where the bad guys are at. I should probably actually look at my mini-map, too. That's probably like a thing that would be useful. Hard to split the attention between the, you know, the CPU, looking at the frame rate counter, all of that, and actually playing the game. Or at least that is my excuse. Let me spawn in on the vehicle again. Looks like I'm no longer in the gunner seat. Okay, looks like we're... Here, let me reset the frame rate counters again, now that I'm spawned in. Okay, a lot of destruction going on there. 1% lows dipped into the 30s with all of that going on. Okay. Okay, I don't have the, like, RPG because I'm not an engineer, right? So it's going to be very difficult to do much with an enemy vehicle. To my knowledge, I don't know if I have anything that's somewhat useful here. Is there leaning? Can I lean? If so, what button? I don't know. Ah. Okay, help me. Nobody's helping me. Okay, let's go ahead and respawn a bit here. But yeah, it is certainly looking like this class of hardware is certainly going to be more CPU limited than not. It certainly looks like the game can load up a huge number of cores and threads, though. At least maxing out 12 threads. But I'm not sure how much else there is to learn in this particular hardware test. Maybe since we're mostly CPU limited anyway, one thing we could actually look at is going up to something like 4K, but being in DLSS performance mode still, just to kind of see how that goes. So let's actually go with, yeah, maybe leave the graphics at the high settings, which is where we're at now. Go up to 4K output resolution and kind of see where we're at. Again, we're in DLSS performance mode though, so it's 4K output, DLSS performance upscaling. There's a lot of enemies right there. That was dumb to peek that. And yeah, because we're CPU limited, notice that our performance is still pretty much where it was before. Kind of hitting around that 70-ish FPS. I'll start some averages once we spawn in. Yeah, looking like we're kind of mid-70s average so far. We had a little frame time spike right there, dipping to 13 in the 1% lows. Starting to smooth out now. Oh wait, that's an enemy! For some reason I just assumed I spawned next to, next to teammates. Well, that was dumb. Okay, Let's try that again. Get a little bit of a longer gameplay session before I do something completely stupid and die. All right. Again, even though we're at 4K, you know, high settings, you know, DLSS performance mode and whatnot, we are still definitely CPU limited at these frame rates. So yeah, it's really looking like a game where your CPU is going to be way more important than your GPU. And I'm still not really paying attention. We'll finish out the match, though, I think, before we end the video. Should we adjust any graphics settings? Let's go with graphics. Let's go back to Ultra Graphics. So, Ultra Graphics, 4K DLSS Performance mode. But again, we're still on that Ryzen 5600X. And notice that frame rates went down, but it's still CPU limited situation. So frame rates are going down because the Ultra settings do demand more on the CPU, despite us still being CPU limited. All right, we're actually in a close game. Should I somewhat pay attention? Capturing this point. Let me see if I can actually assist the teammates here. Where are the enemies at? That's an enemy. I did not assist. I tried and I still did not assist. Let's go ahead and pop back in. You know, my team's doing surprisingly well considering I'm not very helpful while changing graphic settings. You know, there's a lot of players. Okay, oh, we're back in the vehicle. Oh. The vehicle did not make it. Okay, maybe we're not gonna win this one. You know, one more thing we could test though is at 4K resolution, but go down to the low settings. Again, we're still DLSS performance mode. But again, I expect to be primarily CPU limited in this situation. But CPU limited at slightly higher frame rate since we're back to the low graphics preset. So we're at 90-ish FPS. But this is an area where there's not a lot of destruction or anything going on. Let's run into town and see how things change. How's my KD ratio going? Daniel, not doing super amazing. Man, hard to play the game while changing graphics settings. Okay. Can't blame the changing graphics settings on that one, though. Are there any teammates to actually help me out here? Not really. Let's go ahead and spawn back in. We will play this one out. 8 lives remaining. We're going to lose. Spawn back in, though. All right. Well, there it is. Defeat. Not at all my fault, guys. Not at all my fault. You always want your teammates spending most of their time in the graphics menu and most of their playtime staying at the frame rate counter. All right, but yeah, it looks like the Ryzen 5 5600X is completely playable, but it's certainly not going to be a high frame rate experience. Turning down to the low graphics settings does help, but it still doesn't get you, well into the triple digits or anything like that, with, averages in the 70s to 80s, depending on what's going on, 1% lows, closer to that 60 FPS line. The Ultra settings certainly running worse. And again, on what is, I think, a pretty realistic build with the 3080 with the Ryzen 5 5600X, it's certainly the CPU that's the limiting factor, especially if you're willing to use DLSS and things like that. So there we have it. Okay, I was originally going to end the video just doing the 3080 testing here, but I think I also want to try out an AMD GPU. This is the roughly equivalent 6800 XT from that generation. And one reason is sometimes AMD and NVIDIA have different CPU headroom when CPU limited due to differences in how their drivers handle things and all of that. So I was curious if the AMD GPU would actually perform a bit better when CPU limited. Now, it's also important to note that we cannot actually do apples to apples comparison due to the nature of online multiplayer gameplay. We are not going to be able to repeat the exact same scenes that we just did with the 3080. So this is really not going to be super scientific, but still might be at least interesting to get some gameplay. So we're starting out here. Now, I did just have to load into games over and over and over again to at least get the same map, because different maps can be very different in their CPU demands. But here we're at least in the same map. And I've loaded up beginning with the Ultra Graphics preset, just like we did on the 3080. And then we are also going to be using the native TAA to begin with, and then we'll upscale from there. In other words, we're starting out the same way we did on the 3080, again, native 1440p. And we are still on the Ryzen 5 5600X CPU. Can I resurrect him while I threw the grenade and all that? Okay, looks like we can. That is, isn't that a teammate? Why is he shooting at me? Probably because he's dumb like me. There's the enemy, though. So yeah, really just kind of looking at if we get anything noticeably different. It might not end up being that noticeably different. And again, no matter what we see, it's going to be all sort of superficial, unscientific comparisons. That's just the way it is. But also, if you're just watching this video and you're on a 6800 XT, with the 5600X, this can also give you just a kind of an idea of how we would perform. Now, we're certainly appearing to be mostly CPU limited, but the GPU utilization is higher here than what we were seeing with the 3080. And I would say anecdotally, the overall frame rates also seem to be a bit higher at these ultra settings native than we saw on the 3080. So there's at least some potential that we are a bit, you know, not necessarily less CPU limited, but CPU limited at a higher frame rate, which is often the case when comparing AMD and NVIDIA GPUs due to, again, differences in driver overhead and things like that. But again, I wouldn't make any, you know, super definitive claims on that, again, due to the differences in gameplay here. Kind of mid-80s, now 1% lows around 60. This is actually maybe a bit closer to what we were seeing on the 3080. Now that we're getting, I think, closer to the heart of the combat here. Capturing a point. I don't want to be useless to my team, but I also want to stay alive for a second. Okay. There's a enemy right there. Capturing. So yeah, 1% lows around 60. Again, this is at the ultra settings. We haven't turned down to low yet. I feel like the 1% lows were worse on the 3080. Until we turned down off of the ultra settings. But again, it's not apples to apples testing. Just interesting to potentially note. Let's see, I'm not an engineer, so I don't think I get the RPG to try to help out with that tank. Oh well. Yeah, I'm gonna get out of there. Yeah, but man, it really does seem like even getting into that vehicle combat and stuff, that the 1% lows did stay a bit higher so far. I'm gonna reset them. They dipped a bit when we were on that map screen, but let's get into actual gameplay. So resetting things again. Yeah, I mean, it again, not apples to apples, but it's certainly seeming like the 1% lows here are staying a bit higher. We're mostly CPU limited here, but actually the GPU usage is a bit higher as well. So now we're going to go ahead and kick on FSR to lower the internal rendering resolution. This will further push the burden directly onto the CPU. And now we'll have to use FSR here. Let's see, we're not going to anti-aliasing here. We're going FSR. We'll do performance mode, which won't look great. That's one of the advantages to the NVIDIA system is DLSS Performance mode certainly looked a lot sharper than this. This looks pretty fuzzy. Let's reset the frame rate counters. So this is FSR Performance mode, but ultra settings 1440p. Ugh. And again, this, now if you look at the GPU utilization, we're pretty low now. So that's indicating we are more completely CPU limited here. So now we're more directly seeing the complete limits of the CPU. And I'm already dead again. So we'll play on these settings a little bit longer. Or maybe I'm going to get revived. So yeah, not seeing a lot of difference in performance with FSR enabled just because, again, like I said, we were mostly CPU limited anyway. It was actually fairly balanced. So it's really looking like just maxing out the game at native here is not a bad choice on the AMD hardware. Since FSR doesn't look great and we're not gaining much performance anyway, since we were already mostly CPU limited. Oof. Okay, the next thing I want to look at is shifting down to the low graphics settings. Again, remember, not everything's going to apply without restarting the game, but this is the same thing we did on the 3080. So it's at least going to be, match testing in that capacity. But again, also extremely important to remember that we aren't going to be getting direct scientific results, directly comparable no matter what we do. So anything we see here is just kind of, interesting, but I wouldn't be able to confidently make any claims regarding performance. However, we are seeing triple digits here, and I don't remember seeing any triple digit frame rates for any significant duration on the 3080. So again, some at least anecdotal evidence that the CPU overhead advantage for AMD is a real thing in this game and is helping the frame rates be higher when CPU limited on the same CPU. Again, anecdotal evidence. Let's see if I get revived here. Just got knocked down again though. But yeah, we are maintaining around 100 FPS with 1% lows around 80. For a pretty extended duration here. Let's reset the counter again on this respawn. Okay, what? Okay, got a kill at least. I'm not entirely useless all the time. Okay, there is definitely somebody watching those bodies. But where? Right there. He got me. Oof. Oh, am I gonna get rezzed? I might get rezzed. Yeah, it certainly seems like the overall performance, again, we're continuing to maintain the triple digit numbers here on the averages. So it's not a massive difference, I think, compared to the 3080 at the low settings, but it does seem to be helping. Okay, yeah. I am not going to survive that. Fatal sniper headshot. They took me out. Okay, I honestly think that's probably most of what we want to look at here. I mean, we could go up to the high graphics settings, which I think we looked at on the 3080, rather than the low and ultra, just to kind of get an idea of that for a second. Yeah, it certainly does seem to be lowering performance. We're no longer triple digits here. So yeah, the low settings certainly seem to be the way to go when CPU limited, and I have a feeling a lot of people are going to be CPU limited here. I'm just going to go ahead and run out into a whole bunch of enemies and die. Seems like the right play. A lot of games don't really have a lot of CPU scaling in the graphics settings, though, so it's kind of nice that that's at least available. Where am I getting hit from? Ah! Yeah, don't res me. Oh, he actually got me. Oh, not for long though. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and actually switch to the. I think we did 4K for a second on the NVIDIA GPU. It doesn't really matter though, because again, if we're just upscaling to get CPU limited anyway. But let's go ahead and do it, just for the sake of doing it, I guess. So here we are, high settings, 4K FSR performance mode. And I actually managed to get a kill for a second, but not that one. Okay, let's go low settings 4K performance mode upscaling just for the sake of it. But again, I don't expect performance to be any different than it was on the lower resolutions just because we are, like I said, CPU limited. And the rendering resolution does not have much to do with CPU burden. Okay. I did something useful for a second, guys. Yeah. Oh, they were above me for sure. It would help if I knew the maps at all. I don't. And I should actually be running the average frame rate counter, not just the current frame rate counter. There we go. Let's respawn one more time and take a look. Let's reset the average frame rate counter. So again, this is low settings 4K FSR performance mode. You can tell by the GPU burden that we are definitely CPU limited. And there you have it. Okay, so that's it. The Ryzen 5 5600X does seem to be able to give us reasonably playable performance, nothing super extreme, but you can absolutely play the game. Going down to low settings certainly does help the CPU burden, and it does at least appear like AMD has a bit less CPU overhead, so reaches a little bit higher frame rates on it. But again, this is not apples to apples testing, so you can't really be confident on making that call. It appears to be the case, though, and that tends to be the case in a number of games, so it wouldn't be surprising. All right, it certainly looks like you're going to be CPU limited a lot more than GPU limited if you're using lower settings and upscaling especially, and that is what it is. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Are you interested in more testing in this game? Let me know.